Welcome to the Religion and Planet Earth revision video for the AQA Religion and Life Issues paper for Religious Studies B. Before we start, there's just a couple of admin points that we need to go through to make sure that you know how to use the revision guide properly and to make sure that you're making the best out of it. So if you see a piece of lined paper, you should have some lined paper in front of you. If you see a piece of lined paper on the screen or a pen like this, then what I want you to do is I want you to write something down, and there'll usually be an instruction on the screen to tell you what it is that you need to write down or what it is that you need to think about. If you see instructions for exam questions with some sort of timing, you need to pause the video for the amount of time that I've given you, and that'll give you the most realistic experience for completing your exam questions and practicing properly for the exam. And anywhere where you see a pause sign on the video, it might mean that you need to pause it to have a little bit more thinking time or a little bit more writing time to make sure that you're making the most out of what we've got. Remember that you're the boss with this video. If you need to go back, then rewind it. If you feel like you need to stop, then pause it. Make a note of the time that you've got to and come back to it later. Make sure that you're using your time wisely and you're not trying to do too much all at the same time. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is a bit of a keywords test. Throughout the video, I'll be testing you on surprise tests with the keywords, so make sure that you're learning these, make sure you know them. First of all, we're just going to go through the definitions, and all you need to do is write down the keyword as you hear the definition. So first of all, energy that runs out and cannot be replaced. Next one, energy that comes from nature and does not run out. Next one, this is a meeting of international leaders aimed at reaching a conclusion about how to reduce environmental pollution and climate change. The last one for this slide, looking after the environment and protecting animals. Next definition I want you to write down, development that takes into consideration the impact on the natural world for future generations. Next, changes to the world's weather believed by some scientists to be irreparably damaging that have been caused by human lifestyles. This is a cause of global warming. Next one, the cutting down of large amounts of forests, usually because of business needs. Next, the release of greenhouse gases, such as carbon monoxide from vehicles into the atmosphere. And finally, resources that are part of the environment, for example water, minerals, and which are often used and abused by humans. Now all you need to do is self-assess your work to see whether you've got these definitions right. If you've got them wrong, write down the right definition next to them. So the first one, energy that runs out and can't be replaced, non-renewable energy. Next, energy that comes from nature and does not run out, that's renewable energy. Next one, a meeting of international leaders aimed at reaching a conclusion about how to reduce environmental pollution and climate change. These are Earth summits, and they're an example of international action. So if you're asked in your exam about international action, you can talk about Earth summits, you can talk about the fact that international leaders sometimes get together to be able to talk about those things. Finally for this slide, looking after the environment and protecting animals is conservation. Development that takes into consideration the impact on the natural world for future generations is sustainable development. So when you're developing something, whether it's building new buildings, building new roads, whatever it is, if you're considering the impact on future generations and whether things are still going to be around, we can call that sustainable development. Changes to the world's weather believed by some scientists to be irreparably damaging that have been caused by human lifestyles. This is a cause of global warming. That's climate change. The final three, the cutting down of large amounts of forest, usually because of business needs, is deforestation. Release of greenhouse gases, such as carbon monoxide from vehicles into the environment, is carbon emissions. Resources that are part of the environment, for example water and minerals, and which are often used and abused by humans, is natural resources. Do you remember how key these definitions are to your exam success? If you're asked a question with a key word in it, if you don't know the key word, you won't be able to answer the question properly. Equally, if you're asked for a definition, that should be easy marks because of your revision. So make sure you're not letting marks go and revise really carefully these keywords. Throughout the revision video, I'm going to be giving you bits of information that I think are keys to success. And they'll generally be religious teachings that if you remember, they'll be really good for this topic for you to be able to use in your 4-mark, 5-mark and 6-mark questions in particular. The first one of these is the fact that Muslims are caliphs and Christians are stewards. Now, this is a really similar belief shared by Muslims and Christians. And basically, it means that both believe that the planet has been created by God and given to them as a gift. Now, because it's a gift for Muslims and Christians, they believe that God has put them in charge of taking care of that gift, and they need to do their best to try to take care of it as best they can. On your paper, I want you to have a go at answering this question. How will these beliefs about caliphs and stewardship affect the attitude of Christians and Muslims to things that harm the planet? So, for example, we could be talking about pollution. You could start your question by saying something along the lines of, belief in stewardship could affect Christians by... Pause the video now and answer the question. Okay, hopefully you should have given something along the lines of, belief in stewardship or belief in being a Khalifa will affect Christians or Muslims by ensuring that they try to stop pollution as it harms the planet. This is not taking care of the gift that God has given them and therefore goes against that religious teaching. These two teachings are really key to understanding religious attitudes within this topic. Before we start to talk about this slide, just remember, where I've got a pen and some paper, I want you to do something on your paper. So here, I want you to write down 3 bullet points about what we're talking about on this slide. In your exam, you could get asked about the origins of life. And basically, they're just asking you, how did the world begin? Now, there are different ideas in different religions about how that happened. We're going to look at the creation story in Christianity and the creation story in Islam. In Christianity, God creates the planet in 6 days and he rests on the 7th. That story is found in Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible. Various different things happen on each day of creation. So on day 1, God says, let there be light, and he creates light out of nothing. By day 3, God's creating dry land and plants. And by day 6, animals and humans have been created. The first man and woman are called Adam and Eve. And they disobey God by eating an apple from a forbidden tree. Now this is the first sin. God's created people to be perfect, and they choose to go against him. And Christians still believe that this spoilt their relationship with God. That's why Jesus is so important, because his death forgave them for this original sin, and if they believe in Jesus, they're able to have a good relationship with God again. It's time for a keywords test. Give me a definition of natural resources. For a bonus mark in a 2-mark question, I need you to give me an example. Here's what you should have got. Natural resources are resources that are part of the environment which are often used and abused by humans. Examples of natural resources include water, minerals, wood, and oil. We've already looked at what Christians think about the creation story. Now we're going to look at the Islamic idea of creation, and it's very similar to that of Christianity. Remember, the pen and the paper are here, so that means I want you to write down 3 bullet points on your paper to outline what the creation story is in Islam. So, as I've already said, in Islam the story is very similar to Christianity. Muslims believe that before time existed, there was only Allah. Allah created the universe, the heavens, the world,
and everything that lives on it. Allah told his angels to bring him sand of different colours from all around the earth and used it to form a man who he called Adam. He placed Adam in paradise and created a partner for him called Eve. Adam and Eve lived in paradise, but one day Iblis, or the devil, tempted them to eat from a tree that Allah had forbidden. Allah knew that they had disobeyed him, so threw them out of paradise. Time for another surprise keywords test. What is the definition for sustainable development? Can you give an example for a bonus mark? So sustainable development is development that takes into consideration the impact on the natural world for future generations. So for example, sometimes logging companies that cut down lots of trees, plant trees every time they cut one down to keep the forest going. The last thing we're going to look at in terms of the origins of life and how the world began is the scientific view. Now it's likely in your exam that you'll get asked about religious views on how the world began. But some religious people believe in the scientific view, and as long as you justify it like that, you can get away with writing about it. Remember, you need to make notes on your paper as we talk about this. So, about 20 billion years ago there was nothing. There was a huge explosion which caused a cloud of dust and gas. Gravity pulled the particles together, forming planets and stars. On Earth there wasn't any land or sea, just a very hot kind of mud known as primeval soup. Proteins and amino acids, the basic elements for life, were in the primeval soup. Some of these got fused together, creating the first simple forms of life. These developed into more complicated life forms through evolution. They developed into insects, then fish, then bird-like creatures. From these came reptiles and finally mammals. Finally, through the process of evolution, humans came about around 5 million years ago. Now, we've already mentioned that the origins of life in both Christianity and Islam are very similar. But there is a common theme behind both of those stories as well, something that Christians and Muslims would want their believers to remember. So, I want you to think about what happens in each one of those creation stories, and think about what the message behind each one of them is. What's the main thing those stories are trying to tell Christians and Muslims? Pause the video now and answer the question. Hopefully, your answer looks something like this. The common theme is the fact that God is the force behind creation in both stories. Some religious people believe that this is the only important message to remember about creation. This could mean that it allows them to believe in that scientific theory that we looked at. Things like the Big Bang, as well as evolution, can marry up with religious ideas if all that you have to remember is that God is the force behind them. If he put them into action, then it doesn't matter that they don't exactly follow the stories in the Bible or the Quran. Time for another one of our keys to success. This one only applies to Christians, and it's that simple teaching that Jesus gave them of love your neighbour. Christians were told by Jesus to love their neighbour. This means that they should be loving and kind towards everyone. I want you to pause the video in a second and think about this question. If Christians are told to love their neighbour, how will it affect the way that they treat the planet? As a hint, you could think about the idea that future generations would be your neighbour. So think about love your neighbour and try to answer that question. Pause the video now. Okay, hopefully in answering that question you've written something along the lines of love your neighbour would affect Christians' attitude towards the planet by making them look after things more for future generations. This is because future generations would be included in their neighbours. And for Christians to show love and kindness towards them, they need to make sure that the planet is there for them to use, as well as Christians who are alive today. One of the things that you need to know about for your exam is how religious people might see God in nature. Now, if you think about things in nature like sunsets, like natural beings, like waterfalls, all of which have been created naturally, a lot of people might experience feelings like awe and wonder when they think about those things. Now, these two words basically mean the same thing. It's that idea of having a huge amount of respect for something that you have a lot of admiration or amazement for. And these ideas can link back to God. People can see things like sunsets, like waterfalls, like whales jumping out of the water, and think only God, something as great as God, could have created that thing. Write down the definitions of awe and wonder now. Time for another keywords test. Write down the definition for deforestation. Can you give an example of why deforestation might be used? Deforestation is the cutting down of large amounts of forest, usually because of business needs. Deforestation might be done for paper or for furniture. More often, it's done for farming or building needs. Next, we need to look at how people destroy natural habitats. Remember, I want you to be writing down 3 bullet points as we go through this bit of work. So, 3 things that could destroy natural habitats are oil spills, deforestation, and pollution. Oil spills are when oil tankers are damaged and oil spills out into the sea. These can cause huge amounts of damage to sea life and to animals that live near the coast because they damage their feathers, they can suffocate the animals underwater, and they can do a lot of damage to plant life in the sea, which other animals rely on. Deforestation, which we just had a definition for, destroys natural habitats when trees are cut down for farming or for buildings. Obviously, a lot of animals live in forests, and if the trees are cut down, they no longer have a place to live, they no longer have food to eat. And without those things, they can die out. Finally, waste and pollution with litter can have a really bad effect on natural habitats. People dispose of a lot of non-biodegradable items which can be dangerous to wildlife and have been known to cause great harm to animals. Time for another keywords test. What is the definition for conservation? Can you give an example of how people could show conservation? Conservation is looking after the environment and protecting animals. Examples of charities that could do this are things like the Worldwide Fund for Nature, which help to protect endangered species by protecting the environment that they live in, and lobby governments to create laws to stop them from being hunted. Conservation means protecting and looking after the environment, plants and animals. Now, some examples of conservation could be involving repairing an area for endangered species to live in peacefully, planting trees to protect an area from landslides, or it might be declaring an area as a nature reserve so that people can't harm the wildlife or environment there. Conservation is something which many people see as very important. Not only does it protect the animals and plants that are alive today, but it also means that future generations will be able to see the same sorts of animals and plants that we have today. As mentioned before, the WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, is a charity that concentrates on conservation for animals and making sure that they protect endangered species. It's time for another key to success. This is another Christian key rule, and it's dominion. Christians believe that they have got dominion over the planet. Now, this belief comes from the fact that Christians were created in the image of God. This means that they've been given the right to rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the air. This is a quote from the Bible. What that means is that Christians think that they can basically do whatever makes them as comfortable as possible. I want you to think about how that belief might affect the way that they treat the planet. Answer this question, so pause your video and make sure that you're mentioning dominion in your answer. Hopefully, as your answer, you've written something along the lines of, belief in dominion means that Christians will treat the planet however they want. It may mean that they're not concerned about pollution or looking after the planet in terms of conservation, because if they are becoming as comfortable as they like, that is what God intended the planet to be there for. They believe that they've got the power to rule over everything on the planet, and because they're more important than other things, as they're created in the image of God, they've been given that right. Time for our first exam practice question. This is going to be based on the origins of life and how the world began. I want you to explain religious beliefs about the origins of life on Earth, referring to religious beliefs and teachings in your answer. Before we start, let's talk about how we're going to answer this question. It's a 5-mark question. This means that we need to bear in mind all these things here. The first thing we need to remember is that this is just religious views that we're being asked for. It asks for specific religious beliefs and teachings in our answer, so that's what we need to give. Where we can, we need to give quotations and make sure that we're explaining them. This is not our opinion. We don't need to talk about what we think, only what Christians and Muslims might think. We need to make sure that we use specific religious teachings and give and explain 2, if it was a 4-mark question. As we're doing a 5-mark question, we need to try and do 3 different views. I want you to make sure that you focus on the key word in the question. Here, the key words are the origins of life. If you don't talk about how life began on Earth, you will not get the marks. Let's get started. Give yourself exactly 5 minutes to complete this question. Pause the video now, set a timer, and complete the question in 5 minutes. Okay, I'll take you through a model answer that I've written. This would get 5 out of 5 marks. Christians believe that the earth and everything on it was created by God in 6 days. On the 7th day, God rested. The story is described in Genesis in the Bible, and on each of the days, God creates a different thing. For example, on the 5th day, God creates fish and birds. In Islam, Allah creates the whole world from nothing. The Quran described him making the first man and woman from sand taken from all around the world. Both of these creation stories show that God is the force behind creation. Some religious people might think that this is the important thing to remember, and that the story is a metaphor to help them remember this. This means that some believe that God is behind more scientific ideas, like the Big Bang. Now here, we've got 3 well-explained points that describe religious beliefs about the origins of life on Earth. In the first paragraph here, we're talking about religious ideas. And not only have we said that God created the world in 6 days, we're also saying where it comes from in the Bible and what he does on each one of the days. So we give a specific example here of on the 5th day, God creating fish and birds. We then move on to Islam. This is a very similar creation story, but we need to try and make it different to make sure that we're getting the marks. So here, we've got the difference between God and Allah, so we're making sure that we're talking specifically about Islam. We talk about the Quran, and we talk about God creating the first man and woman from sand taken all around the world. Now we could have mentioned things like Adam and Eve here, we could have mentioned the temptation, but we're only talking about the origins of life on Earth, and that doesn't really answer the question. What we move on to now is a bit more of an advanced point. Now, because we've already talked about Christianity and Islam, we could start to talk about the scientific view of creation. But remember, we've only been asked for religious beliefs in our answer. So we need to make sure that we justify it as something that a religious person could believe. Here we can see that we're saying that God is the force behind creation. Both of those stories show us that. And so that might mean that we can use the stories as a metaphor to think about other scientific ideas like the Big Bang or evolution even. The next thing we need to know for the exam is what problems people cause the planet. Now, this is going to be relevant because a lot of the things that we talk about in the exam will be questioning whether it's our fault that the planet is in the state that it is in. So you need to be able to give some specific examples of the sorts of things that people do which spoils the environment. These are various different examples for which I want you to get 2 bullet points in your notes to make sure that you've got specific examples for when you're doing your exam. So let's start off with oil spills. Oil spills are a form of pollution, and seabirds and fish can become covered in a thick poisonous coating that can kill them. Oil damages the birds' feathers, so they are no longer waterproof, and if they're seabirds, this could mean that they die of cold or even hunger because they're unable to fly. Oil spills come from oil tankers generally, and that's when they run aground or they get a hole in the side of them for some other reason. The oil all flows out of them, floats on top of the water until it comes to a shoreline. Toxic chemicals are another type of pollution. Toxic chemicals come from factories and from other industrial processes, and sometimes they're not got rid of in the way that they should be. Now, toxic by definition means that they're poisonous, and sometimes they're put into water like rivers or the sea. Now, this happens particularly in countries where the law doesn't do much to prevent it. It can be dangerous for people who live around those areas, or animals who live close to the water or use the water to drink. Time for another keywords test. What is the definition for an Earth Summit? An Earth Summit is a meeting of international leaders aimed at reaching a conclusion about how to reduce environmental pollution and climate change. One example of an Earth Summit is Rio de Janeiro in 1992. If you want a more recent example, go on the internet and type in Earth Summit. It will come up with lots of different examples of where they've been held and the years that they were held in. Back to the problems that people cause the planet. Remember, as we go through these problems, you need to be making 2 bullet point notes for each of them. So, carbon emissions, another type of pollution. Carbon emissions come from things like cars, planes, factories, and other things that produce carbon monoxide or CO2. Both of these things are greenhouse gases, and they contribute to global warming. This can lead to sea levels rising and polar ice caps melting. We've got another example of a destruction of a habitat. Carbon monoxide can affect people's breathing. It's poisonous and it can cause smog. Next, pesticides. Now this is another form of pollution, but they're used in a useful sense. Pesticides are there to kill animals that would eat crops, so some people would see them as being absolutely essential. They're poisonous chemicals and they can be a serious hazard to wildlife. At high doses, they can even kill birds and mammals, as well as the bugs that they're supposed to be killing. They can also seep down into the soil, join rivers and streams that are close by, and affect the life of plants and animals at sea that were never meant to be affected. Time for another keywords test. What is the definition for renewable energy? Try to give an example of a form of renewable energy. Renewable energy is energy that comes from nature and doesn't run out. For example, energy from the wind or the sun. So wind turbines or solar panels would be examples of renewable energy sources. Let's just take a second to review another one of our keys to success. Muslims believe that they are all part of the Ummah. Now the Ummah is a worldwide Muslim brotherhood, and all Muslims believe that they are part of it. It means that they should treat each other equally with love and kindness whenever possible. So every single Muslim in the world should be loving, kind and generous, at least towards every other single Muslim. I want you to think about and write down how a belief in the Ummah might affect a Muslim's beliefs on taking care of the planet. Think about what you did when you were writing about how a belief in love your neighbour might affect somebody's beliefs in taking care of the planet. Pause the video now to write down your answer. Hopefully, you'll have written something like, belief in the Ummah affects a Muslim's idea of taking care of the planet because they believe that they should be taking care of the people around them. Taking care of the planet could mean taking care of the people around you, particularly future generations. If the planet is no longer there for future generations to be able to use in the same way that we do, then it will not be a loving action. These are the final pieces of information on the problems that people cause the planet. Remember again that we're writing down 2 bullet points for each one. Deforestation is a form of damage to natural habitats. We've already looked at the definition of deforestation, and it's cutting down large amounts of trees for business or farming means. Now, there are a couple of problems with deforestation. One of the big ones is it destroys natural habitats for animals, and it means that many species are becoming extinct. If they've no longer got somewhere to live, then they can't live anywhere. It also means that there are less trees to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. This means that global warming could be made worse by deforestation. The problem's made twice as bad because often deforestation leads to more animals being farmed on the land that used to be occupied by trees. These animals produce greenhouse gases like methane. So not only is the carbon dioxide not being taken out of the atmosphere, more greenhouse gases are being released into it. Finally, we've got waste. Now, this is another form of pollution and something which we're all guilty of. Things that we put in the bin often end up in landfill sites, even though a lot of things like plastic aren't biodegradable. They won't disappear over time. The biggest problem with this is that eventually we'll run out of space. If we're just filling up landfill sites, we won't have enough room for all the rubbish that we produce. We need a more sustainable solution to make sure that we can deal with waste. What I want you to do now is to think about each one of the problems that we've already spoken about. Waste, toxic chemicals, carbon emissions, pesticides, oil spills and deforestation. See if you can think of a solution for any or all of the problems that we have there. Pause the video and write it down now. Let's just go through a few possible answers. For waste, the solution is simple. We can start to recycle more, and that will mean that less waste goes to landfill. For things like toxic chemicals and pesticides, the solution could be that the government introduces tougher laws to make sure that factories and farmers don't get away with releasing harmful things into the environment. With carbon emissions, there are lots of solutions that governments and that people are trying to work on at the moment. Alternative forms of transport like walking, riding a bike, taking public transport or even driving hybrid cars are all good ways of reducing people's carbon footprint and making sure that our houses are better insulated so that we use less fossil fuels and release less carbon emissions are also ways that people are looking at to try and reduce this. Oil spills and deforestation are much more difficult to deal with. Both of them rely on reducing the worldwide need for oil or for the things that we cut down trees for. So that could mean that in using hybrid cars more or in walking more, we need less oil, and therefore there'd be fewer oil tankers sailing around in the ocean and less oil spills. In terms of deforestation, a lot of deforestation happens because of farming for meat. So if we eat less meat, that might lead to fewer trees being cut down. Time for another exam question. This time we're going to be looking at a 3-mark exam question. 3-mark exam questions should take you 3 minutes. So when we pause the video, we need to pause it for 3 minutes and you need to be strict with yourselves on time. Now, again, we've got some things to remember, so I'll just talk you through this before we start the question. The question is, religious believers should do all they can to support conservation. Do you agree? And a 3-mark question is always going to have this do you agree part. So it's based on your opinion. To get all the marks available, you have to make sure that you justify your opinion really clearly and that you answer the question really clearly, including any key words. Here, the key word is conservation, so you need to be referring to conservation throughout your answer. You need to give your opinion, so make it clear whether you agree or disagree with the statement, and you need to give 3 clear and different reasons for your view. Pause the video now for 3 minutes and answer that question. Religious believers should do all they can to support conservation. Do you agree? Okay, I'll just take you through a model answer. I agree with the statement, as Muslims are Khalifas of the planet. Conservation is looking after the planet, and Muslims believe they should do this for Allah. As well as this, I believe that all animals deserve a chance to life. Without conservation, people could continue with deforestation and other things that destroy natural habitats, which is unfair. Finally, conservation may help to stop the release of harmful pesticides or toxic chemicals. This is a nice thing to do, and Christians would support this as they believe that you should love your neighbour. Let's just see what's going on in this answer. Remember, we had to give 3 clear reasons, and you can see here, there's one there, another here, and a final point there. Now, I've made it really clear where those different things start, by the way that I start my sentences. So, I agree with the statement, as well as this, and finally. This makes it easy for the examiner to give you the marks because they can see where the different points are. Each one of the points is also really clearly explained. So you've got religious teachings in the first and last point, Muslims being Khalifas, and Christians believing that they should love their neighbour. But in every single point, we've got this idea of conservation being referred back to. So it's really clear for the examiner that you're answering the question. This didn't take very long, it should only have taken 3 minutes, and it's really clearly giving 3 full marks. One thing to remember with a 3-mark question is that you do not have to refer to religious beliefs and teachings. The middle point here doesn't have any religious beliefs and teachings in it at all. So if you're struggling in your exam and can think of some simple points but can't think of a religious teaching to go with it, for 3 marks, don't worry. Just remember to refer back to your keyword. In this case, it was conservation. Time for another keywords test. What is the definition for carbon emissions? Can you give an example of where carbon emissions might come from? Carbon emissions are the release of greenhouse gases such as carbon monoxide from vehicles into the atmosphere. An example could be release through vehicles like cars, planes or factories. Next we need to talk about global warming. This is an important topic, and as we go through it, I want you to try and make at least 3 bullet point notes to explain what global warming is, so that if you're asked about it in an exam, you've got a really clear idea of how to explain it. So, global warming is the term used for increasing temperature that the Earth has gone through, particularly over the last century. Many scientists believe that this is caused by human activity. This is because greenhouse gases, such as carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, released by things like planes and cars, contribute to the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is basically an insulating layer which comes around the Earth's atmosphere. What that means is that when the sun's rays come down to Earth and reflect back up off the Earth, a lot of the rays are bounced back down into the Earth. They've created this reflective or insulating layer around the planet. Now, the greenhouse effect is necessary for the Earth to be warm enough for us to live on, but the increase in greenhouse gases around the planet, because of human activity, has meant that we've got a much thicker insulating layer and the temperature of the planet has risen. This is causing Arctic ice to melt, sea levels to rise, and some people worry that it's leading to more extreme weather conditions like floods, droughts, hurricanes, and eventually extinction of species. Time for another keywords test. What is the definition for climate change? Climate change is changes to the world's weather over time believed by some scientists to be irreparably damaging, and they believe that it's been caused by human lifestyles. This is one of the causes of global warming. Climate change could be caused by greenhouse gas emissions from human activity. Now, I want you to think about what we can do to protect the planet. On the video, you can see images of various different things that normal people and religious people could do to protect the planet. Pause the video and write down as many things that you can think of that would help the planet to get better. We'll talk about them afterwards. Pause your video now. Let's see how we did. There are various different things that people can do to help the planet, and these are just a few of them. One of them is that we use more renewable energy. Renewable energy includes things like solar panels and wind farms, and it's a much cleaner form of energy than burning fossil fuels. Another thing that we could do to reduce our carbon emissions is to reduce the amount that we drive. Now, this could mean that we get more public transport places, it could mean that we walk more places, or it could just mean that we change the cars that we're driving so that they're cleaner. Any of these things will be better than what we're doing at the moment. Another thing we could do is to stop wasting things. We put a huge amount of waste into landfill, and this is spoiling the environment, and it's not a sustainable way of living. Another thing we could do is to recycle more. Now, these two are linked. If we recycle more, then we'll reduce the amount of waste that we have. But not everything that we waste is recyclable, so it's not always the best solution. Next thing we could do is that we could join organisations like Greenpeace that work towards conserving the planet. They lobby governments and campaign for a cleaner planet and better laws to make sure that people are doing what they should be doing. Finally, if we're a religious person, we could pray for help. We could ask God to help us to make sure that the planet is protected and that we're doing the right things to be able to protect the planet. Any of these things would be a good answer if you're asked what people could do to protect the planet, even if you're asked what religious people could do to protect the planet. Remember, religious people are just like everyone else, so they could join an organisation like Greenpeace just as easily as anyone else. Time for another keywords test. What is the definition for non-renewable energy? Can you give an example of non-renewable energy? Non-renewable energy is energy that runs out and cannot be replaced. Examples of non-renewable energy sources could be energy from coal or from oil. Any fossil fuel is non-renewable. One of the final things you need to know about for your exam are Earth summits. Now, these are meetings of international leaders aimed at reaching a conclusion about how to reduce environmental pollution and climate change. They happen every 4 years, and one of the Earth summits happened in Kyoto in 2002. This summit set targets for all the world leaders who attended to use cleaner fuels, such as renewable energy sources, rather than fossil fuels, and reducing the amount of carbon dioxide emissions by doing things such as encouraging cycling, the use of public transport, and so on. Lots of countries signed up to these agreements, but few of them have met the targets that have been set by them. One of the most important things about the Earth Summits is that they're meetings of international leaders, so it means that people are taking international action. I want you to think about why it's important to have international action to try and protect the environment. Pause the video now and try to answer this question. Hopefully you've got an answer to that question which looks something like this. International action is an important way to try and protect the environment because it means that countries are working together. Protecting the environment will not work if only one country does it and others refuse to. So having agreements where countries work together will have a much bigger impact on the environment. You could give the example of the Kyoto Agreement if you are asked a question like this in your exam. Finally, we come to the most important part of the topic. That's the religious teachings that we'll be able to use to apply to lots of our exam questions. We'll start with Islamic teachings on the planet, and as we go through, I want you to write down the 3 that you think will be easiest to remember or most useful to remember. You can pause the video as we go through, or you can try to write down as we listen. First of all is one that we've already heard about. That's the fact that Muslims are Allah's caliphs. This means that Muslims have a duty to look after and care for the earth on behalf of God. Remember, the earth has been given to them as a gift, and they need to take care of it. A quotation which could back up this idea of being a Khalifa is this one here. This is a quotation from the Quran, and it says, Allah has made you his custodians of the earth. A custodian is someone who protects something for someone else. So this quotation means that God has given Muslims the job of protecting and caring for the earth. This is basically the same teaching as Khalifa's, but a bit higher level, and will be a bit more impressive if you can use it in your exam. Next, we have the fact that Muslims are all members of the Ummah. Again, this is one of our key rules, and it means that Muslims should care for the earth and look after it so that the Ummah can live in it safely and future generations are able to live on earth without problems. Remember, the Ummah is that Muslim brotherhood, and if you are not keeping the earth good for future generations, you're letting that brotherhood down. Next, we have this teaching from the Quran. Say He is Allah, the Perfect. This suggests that God is perfect and that He has created a perfect world. If that's the case, there's nothing a Muslim needs to do to care for the earth, as everything is perfect and being cared for by God or being looked after for itself. This is a really important teaching because it gives you an idea of why some Muslims might not want to care for the planet, and it would give you a good argument to be able to say that Muslims don't need to recycle, etc. Finally, we've got this quotation from Muhammad. He said, "The earth is green and beautiful, and Allah has appointed you His stewards over it." Now the Prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, has said that the earth is green and beautiful. This means that Muslims should do their best to keep the earth green and beautiful. And so any type of conservation, any type of stopping of pollution will be good for Muslims to follow. Pause the video now and write down the 3 ones that you think you'll be able to remember for the exam. Remember, this one is important as it gives you an alternative viewpoint to be able to use in your exam questions. Next, we have Christian teachings on the planet. Once again, you can write down the teachings that you think you'll be able to remember best or you think will be most useful. We'll start again with one of our key rules and something that we've already looked at, the fact that Christians are stewards of the earth. This means that Christians have a duty to look after and care for the earth on behalf of God. Just like with Khalifas, God has created the planet as a gift for Christians, and they need to take care of that gift out of respect for God. Next is another teaching that we've already looked at. Jesus told Christians to love your neighbour. This means that Christians must look after the earth and not waste natural resources for future generations. Future generations are their neighbours too, and if they're wasting the natural resources and not allowing them to live in the same way that they're doing, it's not a loving action. In the Bible, God says, "Let man rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air." This is a really important teaching, just like that Islamic one that we looked at before, because it gives that alternative perspective for Christians. This means that Christians believe that they've been given dominion over the earth. They've been put in charge of the planet. So some Christians believe that whatever they want to do to make their lives as comfortable as possible, they're allowed to do, because God has made them the most important things on the planet. Remember, Christians believe that they're created in God's image. Nothing else is like that. So Christians are more special than all of the animals and plants and other living things on the planet. In the Bible, it says that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live on it. This directly links to the idea of stewardship. Christians see the planet as belonging to God, so humans, out of respect for God, should be looking after it. If you want to make your stewardship points stronger, then attaching a quotation like this would be really, really good. Finally, Christians believe in the Bible, where there's a creation story that shows how God took 6 days to create the world and rested on the 7th. Again, this backs up the idea that God spent his time creating the world, so it would be disrespectful to fail to look after it. We can use this to back up our stewardship point as well. That brings us to the end of that topic. Now, the fact that you've got lots of religious teachings now mean that you can have a go at a full 6-mark question. Now remember, there are a few things that you need to do to be able to answer a 6-mark question properly. They'll always look like this. There'll be a statement, and then something along the lines of, Do you agree? Give reasons for your answer showing you've thought about more than one point of view. Explain religious beliefs and teachings in your answer. Now you're being asked to do a few things here, and you need to make sure you do all of them. The first thing is you need to address the statement that's being asked. Look for key words in the statement and work out what it is they want you to talk about. Here, they're asking you whether international action is the best way to protect the planet. So you need to compare international action to other ways that you could protect the planet. You need to remember as well that they're asking you to refer to religious beliefs and teachings in your answer. If you don't back up your points with religious teachings, you will not get 6 marks. So, remember these points down here. You need to peel each one of your points. That's point, evidence, explanation, link. You need to give religious teachings to support all of your points, and you need to look at both sides of the argument. You can see that here, where it says, showing you have thought about more than one point of view. You have 12 minutes to answer a 6-mark question. Pause the video now and have a go at this one. Set your timer for 12 minutes. Okay, let's read through a model answer. Some Muslims would agree with the statement as they believe that all Muslims are part of one brotherhood called the Ummah. This means that everyone should work together to support each other. Therefore, international action is important in protecting the planet as it involves countries working together at events like Earth summits. Some Christians may also agree for similar reasons. This is because they believe that you should love your neighbour. This means that you should act with kindness and compassion towards others. Therefore, they may think international action is good and will successfully protect the planet because it involves working with others in a loving way. Some Christians may disagree with the idea of international action being the best way to protect the planet, as they believe that they are stewards. This means that they have responsibility to protect the planet on behalf of God. Therefore, they may think that they should personally do more, like recycling, to protect the planet, rather than rely on world leaders to take action. Some Muslims may disagree as they believe in the Quran it says, "Say He is Allah, the Perfect." This means that the planet has been created perfectly by God and will take care of itself. Therefore, international action is not necessary as everyone will be fine without any help. Personally, I believe that international action is important, but that without individuals taking action like recycling, nothing will ever change to protect the planet. Okay, let's have a look at what's going on in this answer then. The first thing I want us to think about is the fact that we're peeling all the way through. Peel, remember, means point, evidence, explanation, and link. I want us to start by looking at this second point. The point is this part here. And all that it is we're saying whether Christians or Muslims agree or disagree with the statement. Here we've got the point. Some Christians may agree for similar reasons. It's simple. Next is our evidence. That comes in here. And we can see really clearly that the evidence we're referring to is love your neighbour. So we've got a quotation from the Bible that we can refer to as evidence. Next we need to explain our evidence. And that comes just after where it says what that means. We're explaining that love your neighbour means that you should act with kindness and compassion towards others. Now this is enough to get you some marks, but to make sure that we're getting the marks, we need to make it clear to the examiner that we're answering the question. In the question, we're asked about international action. So we're going to link our point back by saying, therefore, they might think that international action is good and will successfully protect the planet because it involves working with others in a loving way. Because we've got that really clear structure, it will be really difficult for the examiner not to give us the marks. We've clearly included a religious teaching, we've clearly said which side of the argument we're on, we've clearly explained our religious teaching, and then we've linked it back to the question by talking about international action. The other thing that I want us to bear in mind when answering questions like this is the fact that we need to look at both sides of the argument. Here, the structure really clearly supports that. We've got 2 agree points at the beginning, and 2 disagree points at the end. The final point that we give is our own opinion. You'll notice it's a bit shorter, but it doesn't mean that it's not been justified with some clear reasons. That's really, really important. You have to make sure that you justify everything that you're saying with a clear explanation. You'll notice in all of the points that we're giving some sort of religious teaching to back up our view, and we're giving some sort of explanation as to what that religious teaching means. We've got lots of therefores, which are our links back to the statement, so that we're always talking about international action in each one of the answers that we're giving.